He smiles. He laughs. He works. He even says, "I'm fine." But inside, something is breaking. You've seen this man before. Maybe you are him, the man who pretends to be okay, who carries the world on his back and never lets it show. But what if I told you this isn't strength? It's a slow form of self-erasure. And Carl Jung saw this coming. What you're about to hear may disturb you, confront you, or wake you up. But one thing is certain. It will change the way you understand men who pretend everything is fine. Stay with me, because the truth is darker than you think. He walks into the room like nothing is wrong. His face is calm. His words are controlled. People might even admire how composed he seems. But deep down, something is decaying. He doesn't cry, not because he doesn't feel, but because something inside him decided long ago that emotions are dangerous. That vulnerability is weakness, and that no one is coming to save him. Carl Jung didn't just study the mind, he studied the masks we wear. And few masks are heavier than the one men are taught to carry, the mask of "I'm fine." You see, Jung believed that the things we repress don't disappear. They slip into the unconscious, and they grow. They twist. They become shadows. And when a man keeps pretending to be okay, when he buries his pain under duty, humor, or silence, he's not just hiding sadness. He's feeding something much darker, a shadow that will one day consume him from within. It starts small, a sigh at the end of the day that no one hears, an ache in the chest when he sees others connect in ways he can't, the feeling that he's drifting quietly into a version of himself that no longer feels alive. But he pushes through, because that's what men are taught, to endure, to provide, to remain composed. But Jung warned us, when the masculine identity is built only on doing, on performing, on achieving, without room for feeling, breaking, or healing, it becomes a prison. A man disconnected from his own soul becomes a danger not only to himself, but to everyone around him. The world doesn't see this man breaking. They see a father who always shows up, a partner who never complains, a colleague who never fails. But when the mask becomes too convincing, no one sees the silent screams behind the eyes. No one hears the voice inside that says, "I can't do this anymore." And worst of all, he stops hearing it too. Jung called this the loss of the self. The moment a man becomes a function, a role, a performance, he's no longer living his truth, he's living an expectation, and it's killing him slowly. He doesn't talk about his failures because failure is shameful. He doesn't share his doubts because doubts are dangerous. He doesn't cry, not because he doesn't want to, but because the last time he did, someone told him to man up. So now he bleeds internally. The most terrifying thing? He often doesn't know he's pretending. The mask fuses with his identity, and he calls it maturity. He calls it resilience. But what he's really saying is, I don't remember what it's like to feel whole. And here's the tragic irony. The more he hides his pain, the more alone he feels. But the more alone he feels, the more he hides his pain. It's a loop, a psychological trap. And Jung understood this trap better than anyone. Jung said that the shadow, those parts of ourselves we suppress, holds not only our darkness but our potential. And the longer we avoid it, the more power it has. So when a man keeps pretending, when he hides every crack in his soul behind a smile or a joke, he's not protecting himself. He's cutting himself off from the very parts of him that could heal, grow, and transform. He becomes, in Jung's words, a walking contradiction, a man alive on the outside but decaying within. And the world rewards him for it, because the world fears emotional truth, especially from men. But inside, his dreams become restless. His body starts to whisper, headaches, tension, insomnia. His relationships feel hollow. He begins to pull away from others and from himself. And then one day he snaps, quietly or violently, but always tragically. It could be a breakdown, an affair, a sudden disappearance, a slow slide into addiction, or worse, a decision that ends it all. And everyone around him says, "We had no idea." Of course they didn't. He made sure of that. But Carl Jung would have known. He would have seen the signs, the disconnection, the rigidity, the absence of inner dialogue. He would have known that behind the smile was a man screaming. That behind, the silence was a soul begging to be found. And the cruelest part? He might have believed this was love, that holding it all in was his way of protecting the people he cares about, that pretending to be okay was noble. But Jung would have said, what you do not bring to consciousness appears in your life as fate. The pain he doesn't face becomes the destiny he can't escape. He wakes up every morning and puts on the same armor. Not the one made of steel, but the one made of silence, of forced smiles, of empty phrases like, I'm good, and just tired. It's become second nature. And no one questions it. But beneath this routine lies something far more dangerous. A war he's waging against himself. A war between who he truly is and who the world told him he must be. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a persona, a social mask we wear to adapt to the demands of the outside world. But he warned that when the persona becomes too rigid, too distant from the true self, it becomes a lie, a facade that costs us our soul. This is where the man who pretends to be okay finds himself. He's so used to being what others need him to be, he no longer remembers who he really is. He performs strength but feels hollow. He performs control but feels lost. And the deeper the gap between the persona and the authentic self, the louder the shadow becomes. The shadow is not evil by nature. It's not a villain. It's the part of us we disown, silence, exile. For men, this often means softness, sadness, longing, confusion, the parts that were labeled weak or unmanly. But those parts don't vanish. They wait. And when they're not integrated, they strike. Sometimes the strike comes as rage, sudden outbursts that shock everyone, even himself. Other times it appears as apathy, a slow death of the inner world. He stops feeling deeply. He disconnects from joy, from love, from meaning. Jung believed that neurosis is often the result of a life unlived, a man stuck in a role that doesn't belong to him, a life shaped by duty, pressure, and fear, not by truth. And yet, from the outside, he may seem successful. A good job, a nice home, people who depend on him. But inside, he's withering. Because the success was never his own. It was inherited, imposed, or constructed to please others. What people don't see is the quiet panic in his eyes when he's alone, the numb scrolling through his phone at 2 a.m., the emotional shutdown in conversations that feel too real, the way he disappears, not physically but spiritually. And the worst part, he doesn't know how to ask for help, not because he's proud, but because he's afraid. Afraid that if he lets go for even 1 second, everything will collapse, that no one will catch him, that the image he built will shatter, and with it his place in the world. Jung called this inflation of the persona, when a man identifies so fully with the role he plays that any deviation feels like death. He no longer sees himself as a human being, but as a function, a provider, a protector, a rock. But rocks don't bleed. Rocks don't feel, rocks don't dream. And that's not strength, it's emotional starvation. There is a moment, a breaking point, that arrives quietly. Maybe it's a glance in the mirror that feels foreign. Maybe it's a conversation that exposes the cracks, or a night where the silence becomes unbearable. And in that moment, he might hear something terrifying. The voice of his true self, whispering from beneath. The rubble not screaming, just one whispering, I'm still here, but not for long. That whisper is an invitation, not to collapse, but to confront, to face the parts of himself he buried, to feel what he was told he couldn't feel, to name what he was told to hide. Jung believed that true healing doesn't come from pretending to be whole, but from confronting our brokenness with radical honesty. And that means stripping away the mask, slowly, painfully, truthfully. But here's the twist. When that mask comes off, the world may not applaud. In fact, it might punish. because many people need that man to keep pretending. His vulnerability makes them uncomfortable. His truth exposes their denial. And so, the loneliest moment of all is when he finally tells the truth and the people around him say, "What happened to you?" Nothing happened. He just stopped dying. But this awakening comes with a price. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. It requires walking through fire, facing the shadow, grieving the years lost in performance, and rebuilding from the ashes. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's about discovering what was always buried beneath the performance. A self that is not perfect, but real. Not invincible, but alive. And sometimes, the man who pretended to be okay for so long breaks down in tears not because he's weak, but because he's finally home. He realizes that strength is not in pretending. It's in presence, in showing up fully, even when broken, even when lost. Jung would say that this is not the end. It's the beginning. The moment when the man who wore the mask meets the man underneath, and they begin to walk together, not as enemies, but as one. There's a quiet tragedy that unfolds when a man begins to awaken. Not the loud kind that makes headlines, but the kind that happens in kitchens, in parked cars, in long walks at night with no destination. It's the realization that he's been living a script written by someone else, his father's expectations, his culture's definitions, the unspoken rules of what a man should be. And in that silent awakening, he sees the weight he's been carrying wasn't his to begin with. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche longs for wholeness. Not perfection, not performance, but wholeness. And that wholeness includes contradictions, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, masculine and feminine energies. The true self is not a statue, it's a living paradox. But the world doesn't celebrate paradox. Prefers certainty, labels, simplicity. So when a man begins to explore his depths, people start pulling him back. They say he's changed, that he's distant, that he's not the same. And they're right. He's not. Because something irreversible has happened. He's tasted truth. And truth doesn't let you go back, but this truth is messy. It doesn't come in a neat revelation. It comes in fragments, flashbacks, gut feelings, sudden waves of grief that have no name. And he starts to see, this isn't depression, it's awakening. There's no linear path, no clear map, Jung warned. That the road to individuation is lonely because it's yours alone. No one can walk it for you. No one can rescue you from it. You either face yourself or you keep hiding, and hiding becomes unbearable. He begins to look around and realize how many other men are wearing the same mask, laughing too loudly, drinking too much, avoiding silence like it's poison, competing in everything, aching for approval in ways they'll never admit. It's everywhere, this unspoken brotherhood of men pretending to be okay. And the irony is that they're all pretending for each other. This is the collective shadow Jung spoke of, not just personal denial, but societal, a shared blindness, a culture where men are taught to survive, but not to live, to provide, but not to feel, to fight but not to cry. And then comes the most jarring realization. Pretending is a form of self-betrayal. Every time he said, "I'm fine," when he wasn't. Every time he nodded when he wanted to scream. Every time he swallowed his truth to keep the peace. A piece of him died. But here's where it gets even darker. Jung believed that the shadow, when ignored for too long, doesn't just whisper. It takes over. It hijacks the psyche. And this is when men begin to lose control. Not in public, but in private. Silent addictions, emotional numbness, sudden rage, detachment from everyone they love. The man who seems calm is often the one on the verge of collapse. Not because he's dramatic, but because he's been holding the dam too long. And when it finally bursts, people don't understand. They say he never showed signs. But the signs were always there, in the fake smile, in the long silences, in the way his eyes never lit up. Jung warned, the more a man represses his inner world, the more violently it will seek expression. What he cannot say, he will act out. What he cannot feel will turn into illness. What he cannot face will show up in his relationships, his body, his dreams. He becomes haunted by symbols he doesn't understand. Nightmares, panic attacks, moments of dissociation where the world feels unreal. And the tragedy, he thinks he's going crazy, but in truth, his soul is just trying to speak. There's a moment, often in the dark, in solitude, where he finally stops running. Not because he found all the answers, but because he's too tired to keep lying. That moment is sacred. Jung called it the dark night of the soul, a spiritual crisis that strips away illusion, not to destroy the man, but to birth a new one. In that darkness, something happens. He starts listening, not to the noise of the world, but to the voice within, the one he silenced for years. And what he hears isn't weakness, it's wisdom. He realizes his pain is not his enemy. It's a compass, pointing to the parts of him that need to be seen, loved, integrated, not cured, not erased, just welcomed. This is the turning point, not a miracle, not a climax, but a shift, a breath, a small trembling yes to the truth of who he is. And in that yes, the healing begins, not with fanfare, not with applause, but with presence, with the simple act of staying with himself when it hurts, of choosing honesty over image, stillness over performance, depth over distraction. And it's in that stillness that he meets the man he was always meant to be. Not the man the world wanted, not the man who never breaks, but the man who dares to feel, to tell the truth, to walk the lonely road toward wholeness. There is a strange peace that begins to grow when a man stops pretending. It's not the peace of everything being perfect. It's the peace of no longer lying to himself. He still feels fear, still wakes up with doubts, still faces days where the weight of the world feels unbearable. But something's different now. He's not abandoning himself anymore. Carl Jung taught that true healing does not come from denying the shadow, but from bringing it into consciousness, naming it, holding it, listening to it. And that's what this man is doing now. He no longer sees his sadness as weakness, but as a message. He no longer sees his anger as dangerous, but as a cry for boundaries. He no longer sees his anxiety as brokenness, but as a warning that something inside him has been ignored for too long. This isn't enlightenment. It's not glamorous. It doesn't look like what the world sells as healing. There's no yoga mat, no perfectly lit room, no soft background music. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone in the car for 30 minutes after work because he can't bring himself to go inside. Sometimes it's breaking down in the shower, and finally, letting himself cry for the first time in years. Sometimes it's canceling plans because he doesn't want to wear the mask that night. These moments aren't signs of failure. They are signs of awakening. And the more he honors these moments, the more his inner world begins to shift. Not overnight, but deeply. He starts to speak more slowly, to choose silence over small talk, to let go of people who only loved the version of him that didn't need anything. He starts to rebuild his life from the inside out. He doesn't need everyone to understand. He doesn't need to explain himself to those who only want the old version back, because he finally understands something that changes everything. He was never meant to live as a performance. He was meant to live as a soul. This is the essence of Jung's message, that beneath the persona, the social mask we all wear, lives the self, vast, mysterious, whole. But we only meet this self when we stop performing, when we stop playing this hero, or the victim, or the good man, or the tough man, and just become human. That's the paradox. The more honest a man becomes about his flaws, his fears, his wounds, the more powerful he becomes. Not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind that radiates from within, a calm, grounded, unshakable presence. This is what the world needs. Not more men pretending to be okay, but men who are brave enough to not be. Men who are willing to go within, to descend into their darkness, to face the ghosts they've inherited, to cry for what they never received, to rage for what was taken, and then from that sacred place, to rise, not as hollow warriors, but as whole human beings. And maybe that's what scares the world most. Not the angry man, not the broken man, but the awakened man. Because he can't be controlled. He doesn't buy into the old stories anymore. He knows the cost of silence, the pain of pretending, and he refuses to pass that legacy on. He will not teach his sons that emotion is weakness. He will not teach his daughters that men must always be strong. He will break the cycle, even if it breaks him first. And maybe, just maybe, this is what Jung meant when he said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not what they told you to be, not what your pain shaped you into, but who you were, before the world told you to hide. That man still lives inside you, and he's not angry that you buried him. He's just waiting for you to stop pretending, for you to turn inward, for you to say, I'm not okay, but I'm ready to be real, because that's where it all begins, not with perfection, but with truth. And now, maybe for the first time. You're ready? If this touched something deep in you, leave a comment. Say what you've never said out loud. Say what you've been holding in. You don't have to be okay. You just have to be honest. And maybe, this time, you won't face it alone because the world is full of men pretending, but you don't have to be one of them. Not anymore.